If your calendar is full, but one cancellation can still throw off your whole week, your business has a hidden problem. See, you can have clients, real revenue, and a schedule that looks successful from the outside, and still hear that quiet thought in the back of your mind, why does this feel so fragile? Have you ever had a full week and you still felt financially uneasy by Friday? Well, if you have, that doesn't mean you need more clients, and it doesn't mean that you're bad at business. See, after looking at a lot of intuitive businesses, I realized the same three identities keep showing up behind this exact problem. They look harmless at first. And in fact, they usually look like generosity, humility, flexibility, or caring. But underneath, they quietly destabilize the whole business. In a moment, I'm going to show you the first one, and it's the one that I see most often. And the third identity is the one that actually traps the most competent practitioners. So by the end of this, you're going to know which of the three is making your business feel fragile and what to change first so that your income stops feeling random. So let's start with the first one. I call this identity the Martyr healer. See, this is a practitioner who generally believes that the work is truly sacred. And because of that belief, money slowly becomes emotionally complicated. Service feels natural, helping feels meaningful, but focusing on revenue can begin to feel uncomfortable or even slightly wrong. So let me ask you something. Have you ever extended a session because someone seemed like they needed just a little bit more time? Maybe you've lowered a price because a client said they were struggling. Have you added extra support and just quietly told yourself, oh, just this one time? Well, if you have, you're not unusual. In fact, that moment is often the first signal that you may be operating inside the martyr healer identity. This identity tends to show up in three consistent ways. See, first, there's underpricing. The practitioner charges less than the work actually deserves because charging appropriately just feels emotionally difficult. Second, there's over-delivering. See, sessions run longer, additional support appears, and boundaries just slowly soften over time. And third, there's self-erasure. The practitioner gradually places the client's comfort ahead of the business's stability. And here's the part that makes this identity kind of dangerous. On the surface, all three behaviors look generous, compassionate, and kind. From the outside, nothing appears broken. But underneath those choices, pressure starts to accumulate. See, a while back, I spoke with a Reiki practitioner whose schedule was completely full. Clients filled most for a week. People trusted her, and they respected her work. Demand was clearly present. From the outside, the business looked great. It was very healthy. Yet during our conversation, she said something simple that stayed with me. She said, Chris, I'm working constantly, but I still feel financially stressed. See, that sentence captures what many intuitive business owners experience. Practice looks solid from the outside, yet internally it still feels unstable and exhausting. So to understand why this happens, imagine that you own a beautiful house with a leaking roof. Every time it rains, water begins to drip into a different room. So you're grabbing towels and buckets, and you move quickly from one place to another, soaking up all the water, and you're managing the damage. See, each individual leak seems manageable. Each response feels okay. But because the roof itself never gets repaired, the underlying problem continues spreading quietly above you. That's what's happening when your business operates from sacrifice. You keep responding to each immediate need in front of you, yet the structure that produces the stress never actually changes. So over time, the business adapts around your willingness to give more of yourself. Sessions stretch longer than expected. Discounts appear because somebody needs help. Extra voice messages or follow-up conversations begin filling the spaces between appointments. Each individual choice you make feels harmless. Each decision seems compassionate, but those choices slowly drain the entire business just based on your personal reduction. And here's the hidden cost. The practice may generate respectable revenue, but very little of that revenue becomes real personal income. The money gets absorbed by underpricing, extended sessions, emotional labor, and loose boundaries that quietly multiply over time. It's kind of similar to filling a bathtub while the drain remains open. Water's entering the tub, yet the flow disappears steady. Yet that level never rises because just as much water is disappearing beneath the surface. And that's why some intuitive practitioners appear busy while still feeling financially fragile. They're not lacking talent, they're not lacking demand, they're simply leaking value in multiple directions at once. The emotional logic behind this identity can feel extremely convincing. If your work is sacred, charging more can feel selfish. Holding a boundary can feel cold. Saying no can feel unkind. Yet a business that quietly starves its owner can't sustain sacred work for very long. Eventually, fatigue builds and frustration appears, and something subtle begins to happen that many practitioners don't expect: resentment. The very work that once felt so meaningful starts to feel heavy. Now, here's an important distinction. The martyr healer isn't bad with money. Most of the time, this person is very deeply loyal to meaning. They care about people, and they also care about the impact their work has on others. The real issue isn't intention, the issue is structure. See, compassion without structure eventually consumes a person who's giving it. When the business lacks healthy containers, kindness becomes the mechanism that drains the owner. And that's exactly why identifying the identity matters. Because once you recognize that the problem is structural, not personal, the conversation changes completely. But here's the twist: the martyr healer isn't the identity that creates the most exhaustion in this field. The next one does something different. Instead of draining the bank account first, it actually drains the nervous system. And that identity traps far more practitioners than most people realize. Now, let me ask you something. Do your sessions ever technically end, but the work somehow just keeps on going? Maybe the appointment finishes, but the client needs just a few extra minutes to process. Then a message arrives later that evening. Then another question shows up the next morning. None of that seems unreasonable on its own, yet somehow the conversation just keeps extending past the container that you originally set. Well, if that sounds familiar, then you may actually be operating inside the second identity, something that I call the overgiving empath. See, this pattern usually appears when someone's naturally sensitive to the emotional state of the people they serve. Maybe you feel that the clients are there. You feel the grief and it's landing in your body. Their confusion sits in your chest. The fear is something that you sense almost immediately. Now, that sensitivity can make you excellent at what you do. Clients feel understood. They feel safe speaking openly. They feel supported in ways that they may never have experienced before. But when empathy quietly becomes the operating system of your entire business, something important begins to happen. Your work stops having edges. Now, let me show you what that can look like. See, I once spoke with an intuitive healer who told me that her sessions were an hour long, and that was the structure she offered, and that was the price that she charged. But when we walked through what actually was happening around each appointment, the picture began to change pretty quickly. The session lasted an hour. Then another 15 minutes passed while the client processed emotions before leaving. Later that evening, the client sent a few messages asking for clarification. Next morning, there's a voice message asking one more thing. But when we added it all together, that 1 hour actually became more like 2 hours of attention. Have you ever experienced something similar, where the time that you officially sell isn't the time you actually give? This is one of the most common signals that the overgiving empath identity is actually present. Here's a useful way to picture it. Imagine that you're carrying groceries from your car to your house. One bag doesn't feel very heavy. Two bags still feel kind of manageable. But if you just keep adding more and more bags to your arms because each one seems small, eventually your fingers ache, your shoulders tighten, and you can barely get through the door. That's exactly how emotional labor accumulates inside a business. Each little act of support seems minor in isolation, yet together, all of these create a workload the structure was never priced for. The owner can't sustainably carry that. So the real danger is that the business slowly becomes dependent on your emotional availability. It only works if you keep absorbing, regulating, reassuring, and extending yourself far beyond the container that you originally promised. See, that's not a healthy structure. That is dependency wrapped in kindness. See, over time, the consequences begin to appear in subtle ways. Maybe you might start feeling tired at unusual moments. You might Notice a slight tension when client messages appear. You may even feel drained after a week that was technically successful. That confusion is important because many practitioners assume the heaviness means they're not meant for this work. But most of the time, the problem's not the profession. It's that the business was built around something that doesn't have clear edges. Once you understand that difference, the next identity becomes much easier to recognize because the third identity traps some of the most capable practitioners in this entire field. Now, let me ask you something. Have you ever looked at your calendar and thought, I should be doing better than this financially? Maybe your week's full. Clients trust you. People recommend you and know the work generally and really helps people. Yet when you look at your income, something still feels kind of off. You're busy, you're working, but the stability that you expected not really arriving. If that sounds familiar, you may be operating inside the third identity. And that's what I call the undercharging expert. This identity often surprises people because it usually appears in practitioners who are genuinely very good at what they do. Their work creates real results. Clients feel real impact. Referrals appear naturally. Demand's not the issue here. The tension comes from something more internal, comes from your relationship with your own value. Let me ask you a few questions here. Have you ever thought something like, well, who am I to charge more? Have you ever worried that you're raising your price might make people feel uncomfortable? Have you wondered whether bookings might suddenly disappear if you're increasing your rates? Well, if those thoughts feel familiar, you're definitely not alone because many highly capable practitioners quietly keep their prices lower than their work actually supports just because it feels safer. Lower pricing feels less exposed. It feels easier to justify. It reduces the fear that someone might judge you or walk away. But here's where that trap begins. When your pricing stays too low, the business starts depending on volume to survive. More sessions, more appointments, more hours, more energy. And slowly the week just fills up just to maintain financial stability. And that creates one of the most frustrating situations an intuitive practitioner can experience. You can be fully booked and still feel like you're just not getting ahead. It's similar to running on a treadmill and you set the speed just too slow. You're moving, but you're sweating and you're really putting in effort, but you're not covering the ground you should be covering for that level of work. You see, low pricing stretches your week, caps your income, and quietly locks a business into a high volume cycle, and that becomes difficult to escape. I know this one personally. So, years ago, when I raised my prices for mediumship sessions, I felt deeply uncomfortable. I worried that people might judge me. I worried whether bookings are going to slow down. See, I had all the usual fears that show up when someone starts valuing their work differently. And yes, a few people did decide not to book again, and initially the volume did slow a little bit. That can happen. But something else happened too. The people who continued working with me showed up differently. They were more committed. They prepared more intentionally. They respected the time and the experience in a much deeper way. And the most surprising part was this. I ended up working fewer hours while earning more income. That experience taught me something important. The real barrier wasn't demand. The real barrier was identity. My self-image hadn't fully caught up to the value of the work I was providing. Let me give this to you with another picture, and that might help make things clearer. Imagine a restaurant that has a line out the door every night. Customers love the food. Tables stay full. People recommend the place constantly. From the outside, the restaurant looks wildly successful. But if every meal on the menu is priced too low, the business can still struggle to survive. Popularity alone doesn't guarantee sustainability. The same thing happens inside many intuitive businesses. More bookings don't automatically create relief if the underlying economics remain weak. And here's another subtle effect of undercharging. It convinces you that the solution must always be more. More clients, more marketing, more content, more hours, more effort. But many times the real answer is not more, it's alignment. Alignment between value, pricing, delivery, and capacity. And without that alignment, success begins to feel strangely hollow. See, from the outside, the business looks impressive, but inside your body, it just feels exhausting. And that's why these three identities matter so much. The martyr healer teaches you that generosity without structure creates financial leaks. The overgiving empath shows how emotional openness without boundaries creates exhaustion. And the undercharging expert reveals how strong demand combined with weak pricing quietly traps capable practitioners in a cycle of overwork. And if you can't see the difference between these three identities, you end up treating symptoms instead of solving the underlying cause. So let me give you one final image to work with. Imagine that your business is kind of like a garden hose with three separate kinks in it. Water still comes out, so at first everything seems fine. But the pressure drops, the flow weakens, and everything starts taking longer than it should. Well, you can blame the water, you can blame yourself, or you can straighten the hose. That's the shift. Because once you can see exactly where the pressure in your business is getting pinched, you can finally make practical changes that produce real relief instead of just temporary effort. And at this point, you may already recognize yourself in one of these identities. So now I'm curious, which of those identities sounded most like you? Comment martyr, empath, or expert below. I love reading these comments, and it's always interesting to see which one shows up most often. See, maybe you saw the martyr healer in how often you give just a little bit of extra effort without realizing the cost. Maybe the overgiving empath felt familiar because your sessions rarely end exactly when they're supposed to. Or maybe the undercharging expert landed because your calendar looks healthy, but your income still feels tighter than it should. If any part of this episode felt uncomfortably accurate, that's actually useful information for you because none of these identities are personal failures. They're just structural habits. They're simply the ways that many intuitive, caring, service oriented people end up running their businesses without realizing the design choices that are underneath their business. So here's the key insight I want you to take away. Most instability in intuitive businesses doesn't come from a lack of talent or lack of clients. It comes from invisible structural leaks that slowly drain stability from the inside. That means the real solution isn't pushing harder, it's just diagnosing the structure. And this is exactly where most people get stuck. That's why I created something specifically to help with this. It's called the Profit Protector Assessment. It's just a short assessment designed for intuitive business owners that helps you identify where your practice may be losing stability, owner pay, or financial efficiency. And it only takes 2 minutes. You can find the link to it in the description below. And if your calendar is full but your income still feels unstable, you'll love the episode titled Why Your Booked Out Business Isn't Profitable. In that discussion, I break down why a full calendar can still leave you financially stressed and what structural issues usually cause it. Listen to that episode next, because once the structure makes sense, the whole business starts to feel different. Build it well. I'll see you in the next episode.